With free agency less than 2 weeks away and the NFL Purge season has officially started in the Pacific Northwest, we're going to be breaking down all of the initial cap casualties for the Seahawks here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in. Whether you're down in Lebanon, Missouri, or Austin, Texas, we greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We're now inside 2 weeks away from the start of free agency, and the Purge has began in Seattle. We're going to take a look at the first wave of cap casualties for the Seahawks, why they made those moves, and what could be coming next. And then we've got a post-combine 7-round mock draft, dueling mock drafts. Rob and I will put our drafting skills to the test. Jam-packed episode brought your way courtesy of FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Now for your lead story here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. The Purge has officially begun. In the Pacific Northwest, the Seahawks releasing 4 pricey veterans today, most notably Dre'Mont Jones, and he's been one of the players we've been talking about since the season ended, believing that there was a slim chance that he was going to be back, at least on his current contract. Turns out that is indeed the case. Jones headlining a group of 4 pricey veterans that were officially announced by the Seahawks as cuts today. Rayshawn Jenkins, George Fant, and Roy Robertson Harris also getting a pink slip. But Jones is really the headline story here because it was only 2 years ago, Rob, that John Schneider uncharacteristically went out and paid big ticket money prices in free agency to bring Dre'Mont Jones in. They thought he was going to be the difference maker. They needed a defensive line. And unfortunately, they gave him a 3-year, $51 million contract, and he was just a guy. That's the harsh reality. He was not the difference maker, the impact player. They thought he was going to be 8.5 sacks in 2 full seasons. They were probably expecting that production in 1 year, let alone 2. And he was healthy, really, for the most part. He played in all 17 games both seasons, so it wasn't about durability questions. He just was not near effective enough, and they save over $11.5 million. This was one of the real obvious moves that John Schneider, unfortunately, had to make.
Well, they did have to make this move. And that's the thing, is that Dre'Mont Jones lasted to the 3rd round of the draft several years ago, selected by the Denver Broncos, because he was perceived at that time to be kind of a jack of all trades, master of none, had played up and down the line of scrimmage for the Ohio State Buckeyes, and did the exact same thing for the Denver Broncos before Seattle made that splashy free agent move. And he did show that same type of versatility for the Seahawks. He oftentimes was asked to line up inside as a defensive lineman and then stand up and be a pass rusher as a stand-up outside linebacker, and he never really was all that productive. He had put up decent numbers, and as you said, he played all 17 games both years, but he just never proved to be a dominant player in any one phase of the game. Frankly, Seattle had better stand-up rushers. They had better defensive linemen. Look, Dre'Mont Jones, I think, is a quality NFL player. I just don't know that he is a frontline superstar. And he got paid like one a couple of years ago by the Seahawks. So I think this was the right move to release him at this point to save the money. And the same thing with Roy Robertson Harris, who is a guy that I think that Seattle would be wise to bring back. And if, I think one of the reasons why they released him in the first place, not only freeing up all of that money, but because, again, we're looking at a terrific defensive line class, as we'll be talking about here in a moment. Also with Rayshawn Jenkins and George Fant. George Fant being the elder statesman of the bunch, I don't know that he is going to have an awful lot of interest from other NFL teams out there. The other 3 players, I feel very confident they will latch on with other NFL clubs. So I think this is the Seahawks basically purging, as you said, just to get themselves underneath the salary cap to be able to be much more competitive when free agency begins. And I think that there might be some other moves on the table, but these felt like fairly obvious moves to make at this point.
Yeah, and I think when you look at Dre'Mont Jones' situation, the one thing that I hope John Schneider is not taking from this is, look, we got to go back to being in our shells and we can't be aggressive early in free agency. I hope that is not the lesson that he's taking from this, because when this signing was made a few years ago, we were shocked at the money that they gave Dre'Mont Jones. And we thought maybe in a different scheme that he would have the production that would match that kind of money, but it just didn't happen. An established player that's had several years of outstanding seasons, those are the players that you have to be willing to sink your money into. So again, I'm hoping that this is not a case where we are seeing John Schneider go back into his shell, because he hadn't been much of a spender early in free agency before that. I'm hoping that it just doesn't make it that he thinks I should never do that again. You had to be able to be aggressive while also learning from what went wrong with this particular signing. And so I hope that is really the lesson, not, oh, let's just completely scrap this. But when you look at the other players that were part of this cut down, Rob, Rayshon Jenkins, the Seahawks save a little over $5 million. This is a guy that the Seahawks love. The problem is he got hurt last year, and Kobe Bryant came in and was just simply better, and he's a younger player. So they are going to go with Kobe Bryant moving forward. It makes no sense to keep a backup safety that's going to have that big of a cap hit. And then Roy Robertson Harris, $6.6 million cap hit, and there's no guaranteed money, no dead money. You cut him and you hope you can bring him back at a much cheaper rate. And George Fant, I would agree with you, if he wasn't coming off of an injury that caused him to miss all but 30 snaps this past season, I think there would be some interest, because he's played both tackle spots, he's played guard, and he's a really athletic player. But if he's got a bulky knee, teams are not going to be rushing to go sign him, especially now into his 30s. So he would be the one of these four players, I would agree with you, that probably is least likely to land an NFL job, at least quickly. I think the other three players, Dre'Mont Jones has talent. He's not going to get paid like he did by the Seahawks, but there will be another team. There will be several other teams that have interest in him. And I think you can look at Rayshon Jenkins and even Robertson Harris. Both are valuable defensive players, at least in reserve roles, if not starters still. So I think all those players are going to get some money. And here's the thing. The Seahawks are $16 million now under the cap, which is good. But if they want to be able to re-sign Ernest Jones and a few of their own free agents and maybe make some moves in free agency, this is not near enough for them to be able to do all of those things. And so this is far from the end. They've got a lot of other moves that they can make. And obviously, Rob, Tyler Lockett, he is the elephant in the room right now. We are 99% sure that the end is coming, and he's basically been hinting at that since the season finale in his press conference. $17 million they can save. We're expecting that move to happen in the next day or two. What is another move here in the next week that you are predicting away from Lockett is going to happen to open up cap space for the Seahawks?
Well, just real quickly on Tyler Lockett, I think that, again, this is kind of a tip of the cap. It's part of the reason why I'm wearing the cap, honestly, about why Seattle chose not to make Tyler Lockett one of the players that was released here. I think it's just a loyalty to who Tyler Lockett is. He deserves his own day. And so I think there's a possibility that he just remains in the Seahawks roster. I mean, they have created some space here, but I do expect that Tyler Lockett is going to be either granted his release or given some type of an extension that way lowers his cap hit for the Seahawks in 2025. But, to answer your question, sir, I think that certainly an extension for either Geno Smith or DK Metcalf, we've been talking about this. I also think a possible extension or perhaps release if he is unwilling to drop his cap number for Noah Fant, a tight end, along with George Fant, of course, who we just mentioned here. I think all of those things would make some sense for Seattle to create a little bit more cap space. As you said, $16 million effectively in terms of the numbers. That's what it was, but really it comes down to about $13 million in functional dollars here when you start to take into account who Seattle is going to have to pay when it gets to the draft. So if Seattle does want to be players in free agency, there definitely are more moves to come.
And I think the easy one to mention is Uchenna Nwosu either reworking his deal or restructuring. And I'll admit today, this was brought up by a couple fans that pointed out that Nwosu had some different numbers on overthecap.com where the Seahawks would only save a little over $2 million by cutting him, and it previously was 8.2. So I did some digging because I thought, was there something that happened that hasn't been reported yet? But that is not the case. There has not been a rework deal yet. He had that bonus day that got pushed back over the cap just did not account for that. So that $6 million guaranteed on that bonus day has been added. So that's where that difference is. But I think that is the move in the next day or two that is going to happen. Aside from Lockett getting released, I think Uchenna Nwosu, a restructure. My prediction is it's going to be like Dre'Mont Jones last year, where they're going to put a void year at the end so that they can kick that extra cap hit they're pushing down the line. They can spread it out over multiple years rather than just moving it to 2026 and putting all that burden on next year's salary cap. We'll see what happens, though. Geno Smith could be the next in line to get an extension. That would open up a ton of cap space. There are a lot of levers that can be pulled by the Seahawks here to get a lot more cap space and position themselves to be players in free agency, getting their own guys back and going out and getting outside free agents to improve this football team. When we come back, it's mock draft season. We do 3 of them every year. We do one after the Senior Bowl and one after the Combine, and of course, one leading up to the actual draft in late April. It's time for our post-Combine dueling mock drafts. We'll get to our first 3 selections. That'll be coming up next year on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by FanDuel. When the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on the action than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, even if you miss the opening tip-off or want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback. You can always stay in on the action. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it keeps every moment of the game exciting. Whether I'm backing my team for a late-game rally or picking a player to hit a clutch 3, I never feel like I missed my chance. Plus, the app is easy to use, and when you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. Welcome back to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. He's Rob Rang. A special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in, and thank you as always for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. As we do each offseason cycle, we do 3 dual 7-round mock drafts. We had our first one after the Senior Bowl. And I just want to say this to our good friend Jim Nagy. Congratulations on his new position as general manager of the Oklahoma Sooners. And that is a huge loss for the Senior Bowl, but understandable why Jim Nagy would take this opportunity with one of the blue blood programs in college football. And we know that Jim loves Locked On Seahawks, so hopefully he hears our message. But let's get to the draft, because now we've got the Combine in the rearview mirror, and this is when we do our second dueling mock draft. And this particular time, we were allowed to make trades, but I don't think you or I did. We ended up just sticking with our picks and making 8 selections. So without further ado, let's get to it. Our first pick at number 18 overall. And look, this is kind of that precarious position. We saw it last year with Byron Murphy II, where the right player falls into your lap. The Seahawks maybe had bigger needs on their roster, but that's the best player on their board. You take that best player available. And pick 18, a couple spots behind 16, obviously, is very similar position where if the right guy falls to you, you're taking the best player available and you're not pressing for a need for a player that maybe is a second-round caliber player.
Yeah, no question about it. And it's not only the best player available strategy, but it's also, in my opinion, an absolutely critical need for the Seahawks to get a wide receiver who creates more yardage after the catch. Look, DK Metcalf is an unbelievable talent. It very rarely is he able to shrug somebody away and be able to create after the catch. Certainly Tyler Lockett, as we talked about in previous episodes, 30 total yards after the catch all season long in 2024. I don't care about the salary cap hit. I care about the lack of production after the catch, especially in Clint Kubiak's offense. Jackson Smith-Njigba is the best of Seattle's wide receivers in that regard, but still, I think that this is an absolutely critical need for the Seahawks. I think that they will take advantage of this wide receiver class, an underrated receiver class, in my opinion, with at least one selection among their top 3 at the wide receiver position. Why wait in my opinion, the best wide receiver in this draft class is Luther Burden III from Missouri. I love his ability after the catch. I love his ability to stretch the field as a deep ball guy. This is a guy who's built a little bit more like a running back than a wide receiver, but he certainly shows running back vision and physicality again after the catch. I think that if he is available to Seattle, number 18 overall, he has to be one of the players that the Seahawks will be considering.
Yeah, and I'm going to go with maybe a pick that some people will view as a surprise. But listen, John Schneider, I think that what he learned from what happened with LJ Collier, and I'm not picking on LJ Collier, but that was really the draft pick that really changed things to me for John Schneider, where now we're really not seeing him stretch for needs. He is getting the best players and get his hands on. Devin Witherspoon a few years back, we saw him do that. Byron Murphy II last year. If Nick Emanwari from South Carolina is there at pick number 18, I think John Schneider is going to be sprinting, hopefully not pulling a hammy, but he's going to be sprinting up to that phone to get that pick in, because I don't know that there has been a closer player in the last several drafts to Kyle Hamilton than this kid. And honestly, I think he's a more athletic version of Kyle Hamilton. We saw what he did at the Combine, and he's got incredible ball skills. He had 2 pick sixes this year for the Gamecocks. And you can look at the Seahawks defense. They just let go of Rayshon Jenkins. Mike McDonald loves to play 3 safeties. That's a big part of his defense. And having a 6'3", 220-pound enforcer that also has great ball skills, I just can't see Mike McDonald passing up on that. And Kobe Bryant's got 1 year left in his contract, and who knows if they're going to extend him. As talented as Bryant is, he does not have the physical tools that Emanwari does coming out of South Carolina. So if he's there at 18, I don't know if he'll be there, but in my mock draft he was. To me, this is a slam dunk. This is clearly the best player available and a guy that can be a centerpiece for this defense. Let's go to the second round now, pick number 50. And you and I are both going to be in the trenches now because, look, I got my safety, you got the receiver, we got the skill guys, but we know that they need to upgrade the trenches, particularly on the offensive side of the football. Who did you go with pick number 50 to try to address one of those needs?
Yeah, actually, I went on the defensive side of the ball. And Corbin, look, I think that this is, the NFL, of course, as some people like to say, is a copycat league. And I think that John Schneider doesn't have to copy anybody. He has been a astute talent evaluator, in my opinion, for an awful long time. However, I look at what the Philadelphia Eagles did, and they basically made Philadelphia, Athens, Georgia, North. And, I think that the Seahawks might be doing the same kind of thing here. And so, of course, they selected Byron Murphy II out of the University of Texas a year ago. I think they can kind of double down with that with a defensive tackle who I think is absolutely on the upswing, and a player named Alfred Collins. And he has not gotten an awful lot of buzz out here because, again, this is a terrific defensive tackle class. However, with the fact that the Seahawks just released Ray Robinson Harris, with the fact that Jaron Reed also is a pending free agent, Leonard Williams is an unbelievable player, Byron Murphy, very, very talented player, but at the same time, the depth behind them is pretty lacking. I think that defensive tackle is a significant need for the Seahawks, and it's 6'6", 332 pounds, a guy that was an all-conference player 2 years ago when he barely even started because, of course, they had T'Vondre Sweat and the aforementioned Byron Murphy II for the Longhorns. And then this past season with those two players now in the NFL, he became an All-American player. His size, his length, his power. There are some scouts out there who believe that Alfred Collins is going to wind up being a first-round selection if he is available to Seattle at number 50 overall. And if it's not him, I think there's a number of other defensive tackles that can kind of fill that hole along the defensive line. I love his versatility. I love his power. I mentioned some of the other defensive linemen, but Jonathan Hankins, of course, is Seattle's, starting nose guard for much of last season, also as a free agent. To me, Alfred Collins has the size and the upside to warrant a selection like this. I do think that, again, like wide receiver, I think the defensive tackle is actually going to be surprisingly early selections, not just all along the offensive line.
The Seahawks have got to do something at the guard positions. And if they're not going to get Tyler Booker in the first round, and sorry, in my mock draft, Tyler Booker went the first 10 picks. So that was not an option. If Tyler Booker's not there, I don't know that there's another guard that I'm investing a first-round pick in. But when you get to pick 50, to me, this is where the meat and bones is when we're talking about the offensive line class. There's a lot of day 2 caliber players, particularly at the guard spot. And Donovan Jackson, the Seahawks are looking for a mover. Donovan Jackson is just that. And I think what he did at Ohio State this year when he was forced to go out to left tackle, and then he had a really rough game against Penn State, and it looked like, man, this kid may not be able to handle this. All he did the next 7 games is give up no sacks. He was fantastic during that run to the national championship for the Buckeyes. He's got light feet. He can play with physicality. He's a good zone blocker, like a great zone blocker. He's really good at pulling assignments. To me, Clint Kubiak, John Benton and company, this is one of the guards in this class that absolutely has immediate day 1 starter talent in this scheme. And I think if you can get him at pick 50, he might go a little earlier than this, but I see him as a second-round pick. If he's there at 50, you got to pull the trigger immediately. And I think this just makes this offensive line that much better right out of the gate. At minimum, he's going to be pushing the guys that are there, but I think he would be a day 1 starter, a guy that could be a long-term fixture at guard, which the Seahawks desperately need. Real quick, let's get to our 3rd-round selections. Now, this is where championship teams are won. Late on day 2, these 3rd-round picks, the Seahawks have had some really good players that they have picked in the 3rd round. What direction are you going with this selection?
Well, you just mentioned Donovan Jackson, a player I'm very high on. I think that he absolutely could be a Seahawk selection, whether it be to 50 or hell, I think there's a possibility even at number 18 overall, just because of all the reasons that you just mentioned. Jared Wilson, the center from Georgia, he's only a 1-year starter. And that's the biggest reason why I think that he might be available to the Seahawks at this point. Look, we gushed about him after an unbelievable combine performance. Talked about 4.84 seconds in the 40-yard dash. I think that is absolutely critical to Clint Kubiak and John Benton, Rick Dennison, all these offensive coaches that have been brought in to the Seahawks. They have always prioritized elite athletes along the offensive line. Just go back over what the New Orleans Saints have done, which is, of course, where all these coaches have gone. Talia Sifuaga was the first-round selection in the past. Eric McCoy was a first-round selection several years ago that has become a superstar for the New Orleans Saints at that center position. They have prioritized athletes that can move, like you just mentioned there with Donovan Jackson. Jarrett Wilson from Georgia would be a terrific fit at the center position. I will say this: if the Seahawks decide to spend some money on a guard or on a center like Drew Dahlman from the Atlanta Falcons, or if they really believe that Jalen Sundell from North Dakota State, who is a terrific athlete himself, if they believe that he is the future at center, then maybe center isn't a position of concern for the Seahawks. But for me right now, I do believe it is a position of concern. And in my opinion, the best center in this class for Clint Kubiak's system is definitely Jared Wilson.
At some point, John Schneider is going to have to find an heir apparent for Geno Smith. They are going to have to invest a pick in a quarterback. And as John Schneider has said multiple times, it's just all about the board falling the way that they need it to select one. They've picked 2 quarterbacks in his 15 years at the helm. Like, it's crazy that a person that worked under Ted Thompson and Ron Wolf does not draft quarterbacks. Like, at some point they've got to. And this is not a great quarterback class, but if Quinn Ewers falls to pick number 82, I can tell you that the Seahawks are high on him. They have liked Quinn Ewers since he was coming out of high school and first coming to Texas. They have a lot of reason to be excited about him. He can sling the football. He can spin it. He's got good arm talent. He is decent in terms of mobility in the pocket. His decision-making, for the most part, has been really good. They think that this is a kid that still has a lot of room for growth as a passer. And give him some more time to learn behind Geno Smith. And this can be your franchise quarterback potentially. But if it doesn't work out, hey, it was a 3rd-round pick. You took that shot on this kid. I think Quinn Ewers would make a ton of sense at pick 82. I wouldn't pick him at pick 50, but I think in the 3rd round, if he's still there, that it would make a lot of sense for the Seahawks to get that potential quarterback of the future. And that would mean Sam Howell's going to be out. But Quinn Ewers would come in and be that backup that potentially could be your starter a year or 2 from now in the Pacific Northwest. When we come back, we got 5 picks left to make in this latest dueling mock draft. We're going to head to day 3 of the draft coming up next here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Welcome back to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We appreciate your support. Dueling mock draft season, our second of 3 that we do during the offseason here on Locked On Seahawks. We've done the first 3 rounds. Now, the meat and bones. Day 3. Championship football teams. You find quality players in the 4th, 5th, 6th, and 7th round. Rob, let's get to the 4th round. The Seahawks have 1 4th rounder in this year's draft. There's a number of needs left to fill for both of us on this football team. Where are you heading in the 4th round?
Well, I think that in the 3rd to 4th round, what you're going to see is a run on inside linebackers. And look, obviously, the Seahawks would love to bring back Ernest Jones. And that, to me, is going to be the path that they'll take. Even if they bring back Ernest Jones, even if he gets an absolutely incredible contract, I still think that inside linebacker should be a position that Seattle takes advantage of the middle round depth this year. Look, I like Demetrius Knight from South Carolina. I like Barrett Carter from Clemson. I like Chris Paul from Ole Miss, and several other linebackers I expect to go even earlier than them. But Smile Munden from Georgia, to me, is a player that actually physically reminds me a little bit of Ernest Jones. And because he had a foot injury that kind of, took some of his playmaking ability away 2 years ago and even tailed into this past season, I think that Smile Monday could be available to the Seahawks. So to me, he is a player at this point would, again, check a box as far as a need and be among the best players available. And quickly, I'll just jump in with a 5th round selection here at number 173 overall. I mentioned before the idea of just kind of making, stealing from Howie Roseman, the Philadelphia Eagles, and how they moved Athens north to Philadelphia. Again, this would be taking a player from Georgia, 2 players, Jared Wilson, the center, and then the inside linebacker, Smile Munden, from Georgia, back to back. Another player that I think would make some sense to kind of reunite with a former teammate, a player that reminds me of a Seahawk, and that being Za Frazier, the cornerback from UT San Antonio. The Seahawks, of course, invested a 5th round selection in Tariq Woolen a few years ago, came from UT San Antonio. Same thing here with Za Frazier. Look, Za Frazier is even more of a project than Tariq Woolen was. But at the same time, the physical traits are undeniable. And with Tariq Woolen entering one of the final year of his contract, you're going to try to kind of bring him back as well. So I think kind of double dipping at UT San Antonio might help in that regard. So that's a theme I'm going to be kind of pounding the table on over and over again, is again, just to try to kind of reconnect here. Za Frazier, again, is a 1-year starter. You have some concern there, but I have confidence in the coaching ability that Seattle now has. They might be able to get a player like this for the cheap.
At some point, the Seahawks are going to need to get younger at the nose tackle position, because I don't think that's where they want Byron Murphy II getting most of his snaps. Can he rotate in there? Absolutely. But they need to get a guy that is a difficult player to move, that also has some penetration skills, that can be a long-term answer at that nose tackle spot. Enter CJ West. If you watch the Indiana Hoosiers this year, Indiana had the best season in program history, 11 wins. They got to the college football playoff, lost to Notre Dame in the opening round. If there was a Hoosier that played really well in that game, though, it was CJ West. Notre Dame could not keep him out of the backfield, and they couldn't move him off the ball. He's not the biggest guy in terms of weight. He's 318 pounds, but he's 6'1". He's squatty. He wins the leverage battle. He kind of reminds me of Poona Ford in some ways. I think that there's a little bit more power to his game than what Poona Ford brought to the table. He can penetrate. There's pass rushing ability. He had a 4-sack season previously at Kent State before he transferred. This is a kid that I think gives you dimensions of the nose tackle position that a lot of teams don't have, and he complements the other defensive linemen that the Seahawks have. And to me, he's a guy that can eat up a lot of snaps playing that nose tackle position as both a stout run defender and a guy that can play third downs if he wanted to and get after the quarterback. As for my 5th round pick, this is the only player that I've picked in both of my mock drafts so far. But part of it is because Nick Nash did not test quite as well as I thought he was going to in Indianapolis. Maybe that drops him into the middle of day 3, but I still love this kid at 6'3", 190 pounds, wins contested catches, after the catch ability, led the country in deep ball touchdowns this past season, for San Jose State. So he checks off so many boxes, and a former quarterback. So you know that he's a student of the game. Maybe he goes a little earlier than this still, but he ran in the high 4.5s. There may be some teams that say, I'm not sure about his athleticism. I am. I've watched the film. This guy can get by people. I think this has a chance to be a really good day 3 selection for the Seahawks that complements the receivers that they have on the roster already. Let's go now to our next couple of picks. We are going to fast forward to the 6th round. We've got 2 6th-rounders to pick here, Rob. Who did you go with those 2 6th-round picks for the Seahawks?
Basically polar opposites, another one-year starter. And again, these are players that, I've watched the tape as well. And these are guys that should be drafted earlier, but because they're one-year starters, I just mentioned was Frazier. And the same thing with Logan Brown, an offensive tackle, right tackle specifically from Kansas. He was originally a 5-star recruit from Wisconsin, but got himself into a fight with a teammate, got cut, or basically got, forced to leave the program. Wound up signing with Kansas, and look, he's 6'6", he's 311 pounds, he's got 34-inch arms. Despite the 34-inch arms, was one of the most physically impressive specimens at not only the Senior Bowl, but also at the Combine itself, with 26 repetitions with those 34-inch arms. Corbin, this is a starting NFL right tackle, and I think that he may fall just because of the fact that, he struggled a little bit and acclimated at the college level. But again, that is the whole point of getting these coaches that the Seahawks have brought in that have the experience that they have. There's no nonsense anymore. These are proven teachers of the game. And I think that the Seahawks need a guy who's got a little bit of dirtbag to him. So to me, Logan Brown in the 6th round at number 185 overall, if he is available. I think he could go as early as the 4th round, but still, he is one of the candidates, I think, at the tackle position that has legitimate starting potential, also is a fit in Kubiak's system. Tyler Batty. I should be talking with our buddy Nick here about any BYU player, but Tyler Batty is a guy I'm really, really high on, 6'6", 271 pounds. He, to me, reminds me a little bit of a player that we've talked about a little bit on the show from Nebraska, Ty Robinson, a big, strong guy that can move. And I just think that you are going to get him for cheap because he's 25-year-olds, like a lot of BYU players, and they went to a 2-year mission. So as I talked about before, there's some gambles with some of these 1-year players, some guys who have some scuff marks on their resume, so to speak. Tyler Batty is the exact opposite of that. And I think that if Seattle's going to get cute and go for some characteristics early, then kind of bring some guys who are high-level Eagle Scout kind of players late. Tyler Batty, to me, would make some sense. 6'6", as I mentioned, 271 pounds. I think he has the positional versatility to be able to play up and down the line of scrimmage for the Seahawks. And finally, I'll just mention one last player, and that would be Gavin Bartholomew, the tight end from Pittsburgh. Corbin, we know that Seattle has some concerns at the tight end position. I think that they need a guy who can be a physical blocker. Bartholomew never was a dynamite receiver at Pittsburgh, but he was a 4-year starter. He can move people at the line of scrimmage. He reminds me a little bit of a Will Dissly. 11 touchdowns over his 4-year career. I just think that he is a guy that people are sleeping on a little bit. I don't know that he's going to fall all the way to the 7th round. He will certainly be available in the later rounds, and I think that he would check an awful lot of boxes for the Seahawks at that tight end position, and definitely in the locker room as well. He was a member of the All AFCA coaches team, All Good Works team, as far as just being a very quality kind of human being. I think that is something that the Seahawks are always going to prioritize as well, especially if they go with a couple of guys that maybe have gotten themselves in a little bit of trouble at the college level. But again, a player that checks the box as far as a position of concern, and also a guy that projects as a possible starter in the next level.
You and I were thinking of the same tangent with the first of the 2 6th-rounders. I went to the offensive line as well, but I'm going with a player that I'm moving back to his natural position. Clay Webb, who was originally a 5-star recruit at Georgia. He was a 5-star recruit as a center. First couple years at Georgia, didn't get on the field very much. There was a significant off-the-field incident that led to him departing and going to Jacksonville State. From my understanding, he has gotten his life together. He has been under perfect behavior since he went to Jacksonville State, except for on the field when he's been bullying people. This guy is a really good football player that brings all the athleticism and movement skills that Clint Kubiak wants on his offensive line. I think you move him back to the center position where his lack of reach and maybe some physicality issues, I think, can be negated a little bit less. You put him at the center spot, and then earlier you got Donovan Jackson. I think you got a really nice, fun 1-2 punch there. And if you can get Christian Haynes or Satoa LeMay at the other guard spot, you've got a pretty promising offensive line. So Clay Webb is a player that I'm high on. And I thought they could pick him last year. He opted to go back to school for one more season. This kid had a really good Senior Bowl, tested fairly well in Indy. I think he would be a really good selection for the Seahawks. And then looking at my other 6th-round pick, we know that Clint Kubiak wants a bully at the tight end position. He wants a guy that can inline block to help get the run game going. That's been a big part of his offense. Jackson Hawes had like 15 catches at the college level. Not a guy that had a lot of production in the receiving game. He did have a year at BYU at Yale. I always get them mixed up because they have the same colors and like the same uniform design. But at Yale, he had a 4-touchdown season. So there's been some red zone production, but he's not really a receiver. But you turn on the tape, and this dude just absolutely batters defenders. You can tell that he lives to block. And I think you put him in an offense with A.J. Barner and Noah Fant as your 3 tight ends, you can have a lot of fun bullying teams. Jackson Hall, at this stage, you can take a guy that is kind of one-dimensional and really is going to help you in the blocking game and offer some special teams versatility. And with my last selection, I got to go to Boise State. I got to get my edge. And Ahmed Hassanin, who was a dynamic playmaker for Boise State's defensive line. This is a guy that was a CrossFit trainer. He was a CrossFit athlete in Cairo, in Egypt. He had never played football before Boise State brought him in. Didn't know what he was doing and still got a couple of sacks his second season just because he's so naturally gifted. And by the time he figured out the game, he had 12 sacks as a junior, 9.5 this year for the playoff-bound Boise State Broncos. He has got some positional versatility. He is a relentless motor, and he's still only got 4 years of football under his belt. This is a player that could still have a very high ceiling. I think he falls late into the draft because he didn't test as well as I thought he was going to. And there's going to be teams that look at him and say, I don't really want to take on a project. But if he's a project, I mean, the dude had 20-something sacks the last 2 years, and his effort is just contagious. I think he's a Mike McDonald player that would make a lot of sense for the Seahawks to add depth to their edge position in the 7th round. As always, you can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube, wherever you get your podcast, to make sure you don't miss a single episode. When we come back tomorrow, we're going to get back on the free agent grind. We're going to be discussing a few of Seattle's pending free agents and whether they're going to be back. And we're going to dive into some of the latest rumors about potential free agent targets outside of the organization that the Seahawks can take a shot at. Make sure that you're listening in and enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Go Hawks.